Nora Bell counted the drawer 3 times. Same answer each time. $200 short. It was 4 a.m. At the Blue Kettle, the overnight shift, the town asleep outside the glass. She didn't sigh. She didn't curse. She just reached into her own tip jar, the crumpled ones in the quarters, and made the register whole. For a man who could buy this whole diner and never miss the money, she'd cover it. She always did. 2 nights later, the developer's man dropped a $100 bill on the counter like it was a joke, flicked it, let it spin. And he said it loud, so the whole room could hear. People like you don't get owed by people like him, sweetheart. 40 regulars found somewhere else to look. Their coffee, their hands, the floor. But here's the thing nobody in that diner knew. 2 nights before, at 2 a.m., the lot empty, Nora had stepped out with the trash and heard a man say 4 words into his phone. 4 words that could put 60 families under a roof that would fall. 4 words that could put him in a cell. She never told a soul. If you've ever been judged by your dress instead of your heart, this story is for you. I'm glad you're here. If stories about quiet people who finally get their due mean something to you, do me one small favor. Subscribe, so the next one finds you. And down in the comments, tell me the name of the town you're watching from tonight. I read every one. Now let me take you back to Ashford, and I'll tell you how a $200 debt brought down a man who thought he owned the whole county. Ashford, Ohio. You've driven past 100 towns like it and never slowed down. The kind of place the highway forgot. Half the storefronts on Main Street were papered over. The mill had closed when Nora was a girl, and it took the good jobs with it and never gave them back. What was left was a gas station, a church, a school that had merged with 2 others, and the Blue Kettle diner, open all night, the only warm light on the block after dark. Nora Bell worked the 10 to 6. Overnight, every night. She'd chosen those hours on purpose. They meant her days were free, and her days belonged to Junie. Junie was 16, Nora's little sister, though little wasn't quite right anymore. The girl was nearly as tall as Nora now, all elbows and opinions, quick to laugh and quicker to worry, the way kids get when they've learned too early that worrying is a thing adults do. Their mother was gone. Their father, longer gone than that. So it was Nora and Junie in a 2-bedroom rental on Larch Street, and Nora had decided, without ever saying it out loud, that Junie was going to have a childhood if it killed her. That's why the night shift. Nora slept a few hours in the morning after she got home. Then she was up, awake, present. She was there when Junie left for school. She was there when Junie got back. She helped with the homework she half remembered. She made dinner. She was a real solid thing in that girl's life. And then, when Junie was asleep, Nora put on her uniform and went to stand behind a counter in the dark. It was a strange way to live. But it worked, and Nora had learned a long time ago not to ask for more than a thing that worked. She was 33. She kept her dark hair pulled back off her face. No fuss. Her hands were a working woman's hands. She knew every regular by their order, which was a kind of knowing. She knew that Earl took his eggs over hard because his teeth weren't what they used to be. She knew the young couple who came in after the late shift at the county home always split 1 plate to save money. And she always brought 2 forks and never charged for the second coffee. She knew everyone. And nobody knew a single thing about her. That suited her fine. Nora had a theory about her own life, though she'd never have called it a theory. She believed that being invisible was the same thing as being safe. If nobody looked at you too closely, nobody could take anything from you. If you kept your head down and your voice low and your troubles to yourself, the world tended to leave you alone. She'd built her whole life on that idea. It was the floor she stood on. She had no way of knowing yet how that floor was going to crack. Now, the gulf. I want you to see it clear, because everything that comes after turns on it. There were 2 kinds of men who came through the Blue Kettle in those days. The first kind was Cutter's crew. Cole Cutter ran a small contracting outfit, framing, foundations, the honest bones of buildings. His men came in off long shifts with sawdust in the cuffs of their jeans and their boots worn down at the heel. They were loud in a good way, tired in a good way, the way men get when they've done real work with their real hands. They tipped what they could. They said, "Thank you, ma'am." They were decent. Cole himself was different from his crew. Quieter, 42, though the last year had put 10 on him. Big shoulders starting to stoop. He'd come in alone sometimes, late, and sit at the end of the counter, and nurse a coffee and not talk much. But he tipped right. Always, even when Nora could tell, the way you can tell, that money was getting tight for him. He was the kind of man who'd leave the good tip precisely because it hurt to. Nora respected that. She didn't know his story. She didn't ask. But she'd formed the quiet opinion that Cole Cutter was a good man carrying something heavy, and she was usually right about people, because watching was the only thing she ever let herself do. That was the first kind of man. The second kind started showing up that spring. They wore soft jackets that cost more than Nora made in a month. They talked on their phones at the table, loud, like the diner was their living room. They ordered the most expensive thing on the menu and left change. And they had a word they kept using, a word Nora started hearing float up from the booths like smoke. Meridian. Meridian owns half of Ashford now. That's what the busboy muttered one night, clearing a table where two of them had sat. He said it the way you'd mention the weather. A throwaway. Nora barely registered it. She was refilling the sugar caddies. Meridian owns half of Ashford now. The words went in one ear and settled somewhere in the back of her mind, and she forgot she'd ever heard them. She'd remember. Later, she'd remember exactly where she was standing. Meridian Point Development. That was the full name, though nobody used it. They'd come into town the way money always comes into a dying town, promising to save it. They were building things, buying things. Their signs went up on lots that had sat empty for 20 years. And their people ate at the Blue Kettle because it was the only place open, and they treated it like a truck stop they were passing through, which, to them, it was. The two kinds of men, the ones with the worn boots and the good manners, and the ones with the soft jackets and the loud phones. Nora served them both the same coffee and kept her opinions where she kept everything. To herself. Then came the night of the catering order. It was a big one. Cutter's crew had finished the frame on some job, and Cole had called ahead and asked Nora to put together food for the whole crew. A real spread, burgers and fries and pie, to thank his men. She'd spent an hour on it. Boxed it all up, kept it warm, ran it out to their trucks in the lot. The men were in good spirits. They ate right there off their tailgates in the cold, laughing, and it did Nora good to see it. $200 of food. A big ticket for the Blue Kettle. A big night. Cole was going to settle it inside. He'd told her he would. He was reaching for his wallet, standing right there at the counter, when his phone rang. Nora saw his face change. That's the thing she remembered most. She was standing 3 feet from him, and she watched the color go out of Cole Cutter's face like water going out of a sink. Whoever was on that phone, whatever they said, it hit him somewhere deep. He turned half away. He said a few low words she couldn't hear. And then he was moving, fast, jamming the phone in his pocket, and he pushed out through the door into the cold, without looking back. He forgot the ticket. $200, unpaid, on the counter. Now you have to understand what that meant for Nora. The Blue Kettle was owned by a man named Ferris who did not come in at night and did not care about anyone's story. Ferris had one rule that mattered above all others. Your drawer balanced at the end of your shift. If it was over, fine. If it was short, that was theft in his eyes, and he fired shorts on the spot. He'd done it before. Nora had seen a girl walk out crying over $11. $200 short was not a thing Nora could explain her way out of. It didn't matter that it was a catering order. It didn't matter that the man meant to pay. A short drawer was a short drawer. So Nora did what Nora did. She counted her tips for the night. It was most of what she had. And she fed it into the register, bill by bill, until the drawer was right. Then she took the order ticket. the paper slip with the $200 scrawled on it, and she stood there for a second under the fluorescent light. And on the back of it, in her own small handwriting, she wrote 3 words to herself. She wrote, $200. I owe you. I want you to sit with that. Because it tells you everything about who Nora Bell was. Cole Cutter owed her. He'd walked out on a $200 bill, and she'd covered it out of her own pocket. Money she needed. Money that was supposed to buy Junie's school shoes that week. And when she wrote it down, she didn't write, he owes me. She wrote, I owe you. Because in Nora's head, in the whole architecture of how she saw herself in the world, the debt ran the wrong way. People like her didn't get owed. She'd absorbed that lesson so deep, she'd inverted it. The man walks out on her tips, and she writes down that she's the one who owes. That's not weakness. Understand that. It's a wound. A wound she'd been carrying so long, she'd stopped feeling it as a wound at all. She folded the ticket and tucked it into the pocket of her apron. And she went back to work. The days went by, and the ticket stayed in her apron. Cole came back into the diner that week. Nora saw him remember. She watched it happen. He sat down at the counter, and about halfway through his coffee she saw his eyes go wide for a second, and his hand went to his back pocket, and she knew he'd just recalled the catering order and the $200. He looked at her. She looked back, calm, and said nothing, and poured his refill. He opened his mouth to say something. And then, whatever it was, whatever storm was going on in that man's life, it swallowed the words back down. He said, Nora, I'll square up with you. This week. I'm good for it. I know you are, she said. And she meant it. She wasn't worried about the money in a moral way. She'd already made peace with losing it. She'd said, I know you are the way you reassure a man who needs reassuring, not the way you press a man for a debt. He didn't square up that week. Or the next. It wasn't that Cole Cutter was a thief. He wasn't. Every other coffee, every burger he ate at that counter, he tipped heavy. So heavy that Nora understood he was trying to pay her back sideways. A few dollars at a time, without ever having to say the shameful thing out loud, which was that he did not, right now, have $200 to give her. The man was drowning. She could see it. Whatever had come at him on that phone in the parking lot had come at him again and again since. He was thinner every week. There were nights he sat at her counter and ordered a plate and pushed it around and left it, and she'd clear it, and it was like he hadn't touched it at all. So the ticket stayed in her apron, week after week, and it became a small thing that lived against her hip through every shift. A little dishonor, a small wrong that nobody would ever fix. She didn't know it yet, but that small wrong was a mirror, a perfect little mirror of a much larger one. Somewhere in this town, a man was being asked to sign his name to a much bigger lie, a lie about a much bigger debt, and the whole weight of it was bending him the same way the ticket bent her. She just hadn't seen the big one yet. She saw it at 2 a.m. It was a dead night. The kind where the diner is a lit box and the world outside is nothing. Nora had a bag of trash to take to the dumpster out back, so she pushed through the rear door into the cold. The lot was empty. One truck under the far light. Cole's truck. And Cole was leaning against it, phone to his ear, and his voice carried the way a low voice carries across an empty lot in the dead of night, which is farther than the man ever thinks it will. The footings won't hold winter, he said. That was it. That was what she heard. 5 words. The footings won't hold winter. She didn't know what it meant. Not really. Not yet. But she knew the way he said it. Flat, hollowed out. The voice of a man saying a thing he already knew was wrong and could not stop. It was the voice of a man standing at the edge of something. He heard the door. He turned. And for one long second, Cole Cutter looked at Nora Bell across that empty parking lot, and she looked at him. and each of them understood that she had heard. Neither of them said a word. That was the whole thing. He didn't explain. She didn't ask. She lifted the trash bag a little, as if to say, just taking out the trash, nothing to see, and she walked to the dumpster and dropped it in and walked back inside. And Cole stood there in the cold with his phone dead in his hand and watched the door close behind her. Here's what you need to understand about what Nora did next. She did nothing. She said nothing. She filed it away in the same locked place she filed everything, and she went back to refilling ketchup bottles. In her mind, it wasn't her business. A man's private trouble was a private thing. She'd spent her whole life wanting people to leave her troubles alone, and she extended the same mercy to everyone else. Automatically, like breathing. She wasn't protecting Cole. Not yet. She was just being who she was. The woman who kept things to herself. But a vault had just been planted. And the man who owned the town was about to find out there was a witness. And when he did, everything about Nora's quiet, careful, invisible life was going to come apart. The Meridian people came more often after that. It was like the diner had become a place they held court. And they'd brought their king. His name was Ronan Halvorsen. He was the principal of Meridian Point, the man whose name was on the top of the letterhead, and you knew him the second he walked in. Some men fill a room by being big. Halvorsen filled it by being certain. He had silver hair and a golfer's tan in a town where nobody golfed, and he talked like every word out of his mouth was already a done deal. He'd sit in the corner booth and hold forth, and the whole diner would get quieter, and he liked that. He liked being the loudest thing in any room. And he had a man with him. Always. A softer, smaller, smiling man named Del Prague. Prague was Meridian's site liaison, which was a clean word for what he actually was, which was the man who made problems go away. Where Halvorsen was loud, Prague was quiet. Where Halvorsen looked past you, Prague looked at you. Really looked. He had a way of smiling that never once reached his eyes. And he watched the room the way a cat watches a bird, patient. And Nora, who was a professional watcher herself, recognized a fellow watcher the moment she saw him, and something in her went cold. She learned, listening the way a waitress learns everything, by being invisible near loud men, what they were building. Halstead Court. That was the name of it. It was Meridian's flagship, the thing that was supposed to prove they were saviors and not vultures. An affordable housing development on the north edge of town. Real apartments, real homes, for real families who needed them. And there were families who needed them, Lord, there were. Nora heard the number. 60 families on the wait list. 60. People who were doubled up with relatives, people in motels, people a paycheck away from a car. Halstead Court was going to be their answer. And there was a date on it. A hard date. The certificate of occupancy ceremony, when the county blessed the buildings as safe and handed over the keys, was 30 days out. 30 days, and 60 families would move in. Halvorsen talked about it like it was a coronation. His ribbon cutting. The mayor was coming. There'd be press. There was a tax abatement riding on it. Some deal with the county that would make Meridian richer still. To him, Halstead Court wasn't 60 families. It was inventory. It was a photo op. It was the day everyone in Ashford would finally have to admit that Ronan Halvorsen had saved them. Nora served him his coffee and cleared his plate and stayed invisible and thought her private thoughts. And she did not yet let herself connect the 60 families and the ribbon and the 30 days to 5 words she'd heard in a parking lot at 2 a.m. The footings won't hold winter. She wasn't ready to connect them. Connecting them would mean it was her business, and she'd already decided it wasn't. Then came the day Del Prague made it her business, in front of everyone. It was mid-shift, the diner near full, that stretch where the late crowd and the early crowd overlap and every stool is taken. Halvorsen and Prague had eaten. Nora had run their check. And when she set the little tray down for Prague to settle up, He did a thing that she would replay in her mind for a long time. He took out $100 bill, and he didn't hand it to her. He held it up for a second so the room could see it, and then he flicked it onto the counter, where it spun and settled. A tip. A joke of a tip, 10 times the check, a thing designed to be seen. And he leaned back, and he smiled that smile that never reached his eyes. And he said it loud. Loud enough for the whole diner. "For your trouble, sweetheart," he said. "Buy your kid something." And then, louder, to the room, to no one, to everyone, half laughing, "People like you don't get owed by people like him, sweetheart. World doesn't work that way." I don't fully know what he meant by it. Maybe he didn't either. Maybe it was just cruelty for sport. The way men like that are cruel to waitresses and busboys to feel the size of themselves. Or maybe, and this is the thing that made Nora's blood go still, maybe it was a message. Maybe Del Pra had started to wonder about a woman who'd been in a parking lot at 2 a.m., and this was him letting her know her place. Reminding her, in front of 40 witnesses, that nobody in this town would ever take her word over theirs. That people like her didn't get owed, didn't get believed, didn't get to matter. The diner went silent. And then, worse than silent. 40 regulars, people Nora had served for years, people whose orders she knew by heart, whose kids she'd watched grow up over that counter. Every single one of them found somewhere else to look. Earl looked at his eggs. The young couple looked at their split plate. The trucker by the window looked out at the lot. Nobody said a word. Nobody said, "That's enough." Nobody said, "You can't talk to her like that." They just looked away and let it happen. Because Meridian owned half of Ashford now, and you did not cross Meridian, not even to defend a waitress you liked. That's the gulf, right there. That's the whole abyss made visible in one moment. On one side, a man who could flick $100 like a toy. On the other side, a woman who'd covered his kind of debt out of her own tip jar. And 40 people who knew which side they didn't dare stand on. And Cole Cutter was there. He was at the end of the counter, where he always sat. And he saw all of it. He saw Prague flick the bill. He heard the line. And he watched Nora Bell. Because here's what Nora did. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She did not throw the 100 back in Pra's smiling face, though God knows she wanted to. She reached out, calm as still water, and she picked up the $100 bill, and she made change. And she counted Pra's actual legitimate tip, a couple of dollars, out of it, and she set the rest of his money back down on the tray in front of him. His change, all of it. She didn't keep the joke. She didn't take the insult money. She just quietly, without a word, refused to be bought and refused to make a scene. And she turned and walked to the coffee station and started a fresh pot with hands that did not shake. And Cole Cutter watched her do it. He watched her take that in front of the whole town and not break. And he watched something else, something only he could see, because only he knew what was in that parking lot at 2 a.m. He watched a woman who was holding his secret, his ruinous, life-ending secret, take a public beating for being poor and give not 1 inch, and not even now, even provoked, even humiliated, use the one thing she had. She could have. In that moment, cornered and shamed, another person might have. She could have said something. Hinted, let them know she wasn't nothing, that she knew things. She didn't. She poured coffee. She still hadn't told a soul. And Cole understood sitting there that she wasn't going to. Something shifted in Cole Cutter that day. You couldn't have seen it from the outside. But a man who is drowning notices, more than anyone alive, the one person in the water who could push his head under and chooses, over and over, not to. He'd been so deep in his own ruin, he'd stopped seeing people. And now, he saw Nora. Not the waitress, her. He started to change how he was, In small ways so small only a watcher would catch them, and Nora was a watcher. He started covering the early open. The meter, the diner's morning setup, needed doing before dawn, and it was Nora's least favorite part of the shift, dragging in the delivery crates in the dark and the cold. And one morning Cole was just there, wordless, in the dark lot, and he grabbed the heavy crates and carried them to the door before she could, and then he touched the brim of his cap and got in his truck and left. Didn't wait to be thanked. Didn't want it. A few mornings later, her car wouldn't start. The old alternator, finally dead, her greatest fear, because a dead car meant no way to get Junie to the things Junie needed to get to. She popped the hood in the gray dawn light, near tears, and Cole's truck pulled in, and he got out with a toolbox already in his hand, like he'd known, and he had it running in 20 minutes. She tried to pay him. He wouldn't hear it. Alternator was on its way out, he said, wiping his hands. You'd have been stranded by Friday. And he left before she could argue. So she found her own way to answer. She started having his coffee already poured when he came in. Just there waiting at the end of the counter that was his, so that a man who couldn't afford to feel taken care of got taken care of anyway. Once, quietly, every night. It was nothing. It was everything. Two people who had each decided the world owed them nothing, learning to give each other something and pretend it cost them nothing to do it. But even as that small, warm thing grew between them, Nora was watching the man come apart. He never ate. The plates went back untouched. He'd aged years and weeks. And Nora, who had heard 5 words in a parking lot and filed them away as none of her business, found that she could not, quite, stop thinking about them. The footings won't hold winter. And she started, without meaning to put things together. She heard the Meridian men talk. She read the town paper that sat on the counter. And a picture began to assemble itself in the quiet, careful part of her mind that never rested. Halstead Court, the affordable housing build. Cutter's crew had poured the foundations on it. She knew that now. She'd heard the men mention it. Cole's outfit did the footings. And she remembered, buried in a booth conversation weeks back, one of the Meridian people griping about the north lot, about drainage, about the soil out there being wrong. And she remembered the paper mentioning the county inspection had cleared, signed off. All good. Move in 30 days. The footings won't hold winter. Nora Bell stood behind her counter, one dead night, and felt the floor of her safe, invisible life tilt under her. Because she understood, all at once, what she'd been carrying against her hip and in her ear. She understood that Meridian had built the foundations of a home for 60 families on ground everyone knew was bad, that an inspection that should have failed had somehow passed, and that a good man, a drowning man, a man who carried her ticket-sized guilt as a house-sized weight, had let it happen. Cole's signature was on it. It had to be. That was the phone call. That was the parking lot. That was why he didn't eat. She didn't know why yet. She didn't know what had a man like Cole Cutter by the throat. But she knew what she knew. 60 families. Bad ground. Winter coming. A signed piece of paper that lied. And she knew one more thing. The thing that mattered most. The thing that was going to cost her everything she'd built. She knew that Del Pra had watched her walk out of that back door at 2 a.m. She'd seen it in the way he flicked that 100. People like you don't get owed. That hadn't been about money. She understood that now. It had been a warning. He suspected. He knew she'd been in the lot. And a man like Prague did not leave a thing like that alone. She was right. He didn't. He came to see her a few nights later, at the counter, when the diner was near empty and Cole wasn't there. Just Pra, alone, smiling, ordering pie he didn't touch. He talked to her friendly for a while, about the weather, about the town, about how a smart woman keeps her head down in hard times and stays out of things that don't concern her. And then, still smiling, he stopped being friendly, just for a second, just long enough for her to see what was underneath, and he said, "You keep long hours, don't you, Nora? All alone out here at 2, 3 in the morning. Man could imagine you see all sorts of things, hours like that. Things I'd be ashamed to misremember." And Nora Bell looked Del Pra in his flat, cold eyes, and she smiled her professional waitress smile, and she said, "I see coffee, Mr. Pra. That's about all I see out here. You want that pie boxed up?" He held her gaze a long moment. Then the smile came back on. "You're a smart one," he said softly, and it was not a compliment, it was a measurement. He was pricing her, figuring out her number, because Del Pra believed, down to his bones, that everybody had a number, and all he had to do was find hers. He slid off the stool. He left. And Nora stood there in the empty diner with her heart going hard, because she knew, the way you know a storm is coming from the smell of the air, that Del Pra was going to come back. And next time, he wasn't going to come with questions. He was going to come with an offer. A check with a number on it. A number big enough, he'd figure, to buy the silence of a poor waitress, raising a kid alone in a rented house on Larch Street. And Nora Bell, who had spent her whole life believing that being invisible was the only way to be safe, stood alone under the fluorescent lights at 3 a.m. and understood that her invisibility was over. She'd been seen. By Prague. By Cole. By her own conscience. The safe, quiet, head-down life was already gone. She just hadn't had to choose yet. But the choice was coming. It was folded up in Del Pra's pocket right now, with a lot of zeros on it. And what Nora did when he laid it on her counter was going to decide whether 60 families slept warm that winter, or whether the ground gave way beneath them. She reached into her apron, and her fingers found the old order ticket, soft now from weeks of handling, 3 words in her own hand. $200. I owe you. She held it a moment in the dark. And she thought about a man who couldn't pay her back $200, and a man across town who could buy her whole life with the change in his pocket. And which of the two of them she was about to risk everything for? She already knew. She just wasn't ready to say it out loud. 2 nights later, Del Pra came back, and he came the way she knew he would. No questions this time. He came at the dead middle of her shift, when the diner was empty except for Earl nursing his eggs over hard in the corner. And he sat at the counter like he owned the stool, and he did not order coffee. He set an envelope down, slid it across with 2 fingers. "Open it," he said. Nora didn't. She kept wiping the same clean spot on the counter she'd already wiped. "Go on," he said, gentle as a man coaxing a dog. "It's for you, a consulting fee. Meridian likes to take care of the people who help a project along. I haven't helped anything along. That's exactly what we're paying for." He smiled. The smile never reached anywhere near his eyes. "We just need it in writing that you didn't hear anything worth repeating. That's all. A signature. And a number that changes your life." She opened it then. Not because she wanted it. Because she wanted to see the shape of the thing she was about to refuse. It was a lot of zeros. More money than she'd made in the last 4 years standing on these floors. Enough for a house that wasn't rented. Enough for Junie's college. Enough to stop counting the drawer 3 times before dawn, praying it landed even. She looked at it a long moment. Earl, in the corner, had gone still over his plate. Then Nora Bell tore the check in half, right down the middle, through all those zeros. And she laid the 2 pieces down next to a slice of pie she hadn't served him. "He owes me $200, she said. Her voice was flat and even and did not shake. "You don't have enough to buy the rest of me." Prague's smile held, but something behind it went cold. He looked at the torn halves of the check the way a man looks at a snake he'd been told was dead. "You're going to regret that," he said quietly. "Maybe." She picked up the pieces and dropped them in the bin under the register. "But I'll sleep." He stood, buttoned his coat. At the door he stopped, and he didn't turn all the way around, and he said, "You should think about that girl of yours." And then he was gone. And Nora stood there with her heart hammering and her hands perfectly steady. And Earl in the corner set his fork down and said, "Lo, good for you, hun," which was the only medal she was ever going to get, and it was enough. She'd chosen. There was no unchoosing it now. The next weeks were quiet, in the way a held breath is quiet. Cole started coming in before his crew. He'd let himself in when she flipped the sign, take the meter apart, and cover the early open himself so she didn't have to fight the cranky lock in the cold. He never asked. He just did it. And one dawn her alternator finally gave up in the lot, dead as a stone, and she came out into the gray light to find him already under the hood with a work lamp, sleeves rolled, hands black to the wrist, and he closed it and wiped his fingers and said, "Try her now." And she turned the key, and it caught. And neither of them said thank you or you're welcome, because between the two of them those words had stopped meaning anything. They meant more than that now. She started pouring his coffee before he sat. Black, no sugar, waiting on the counter when the truck pulled in. And she watched him come apart. Because he wasn't eating. A man that size. Working the hours he worked, and he'd order and push it around the plate and leave it. His face was going hollow under the eyes. His hands, when he thought no one was looking, had a fine tremble in them. Nora had raised a girl through grief. She knew what a person looked like when they were carrying something too heavy to set down and too shameful to name. And in her own quiet hours, wiping tables, refilling ketchup, she'd been putting it together. What she'd heard at 2 a.m. in the empty lot. The footings won't hold winter. And what she read in the free paper, and what the busboy muttered, and what the county records office let anybody look at if they asked plain. Halstead Court. 60 families on the wait list. An affordable build that Meridian was rushing to a ribbon cutting inside 30 days. Foundations poured over ground that everyone in the business knew had a drainage problem. An inspection that had somehow signed off on every bit of it. And the name on the contractor line of that inspection was Cutter & Sons. She knew what she was looking at. She just didn't know yet why a decent man had put his name on 60 families' graves. Then Meridian stopped being subtle. Her hours got cut. Ferris wouldn't meet her eye when he did it. Slow season, Nora. Nothing personal, but she'd worked slow seasons for years and never lost a shift. And she understood the lease on the Blue Kettle ran through a management company. And the management company answered to money. And the money had a name that started with Meridian. 2 shifts became 1. 1 became on call. Then Junie came home and said the drugstore let her go. No reason. Just let her go. 16 years old and proud of that little paycheck. And she'd cried in the bathroom where she thought Nora couldn't hear. And 2 nights before the end of that terrible week, Nora walked out to her car in the diner lot, and there was a note under the windshield wiper. Block letters. No signature. She read it once, and she folded it into her coat, and she did not tell Junie, and she stood in the cold a while, with the thing that mentioned her sister by name burning in her pocket. That was the price now. Not a check she could tear. Her rent. Her sister. The roof over the only person left in the world who was hers. She almost broke. God. She almost broke. She sat in the dead car in the dark and thought about the torn check in the bin, and thought maybe pride was a thing a woman like her couldn't afford, and maybe 60 families weren't her problem, and maybe Invisible was safe after all. And then Cole told her why. He came in at the tail of a rain, soaked through, and sat at the counter, and she poured his coffee, and he looked at it and didn't touch it, and he said, "You need to know something. So you stop looking at me like I might be a good man." And it came out of him in pieces, the way a thing does when it's been chewing a man alive. His brother Ray. Younger sick a long time before the end, and the medical debt on that sickness had been a mountain, and when Ray died it fell on the family, and Cole had signed for a piece of it to keep his brother from dying scared and buried in collections. Meridian bought that debt. Quietly, the way they bought everything in Ashford. And then Meridian held the loan on Cutter & Sons. The whole outfit, everything Cole's father had built, and the second mortgage on his mother's house, the house with the porch, the house Ray grew up in. The house where his widow and her 2 kids were staying now because they had nowhere else. Prague sat me down, Cole said. His voice had gone to gravel. Told me the Halstead footings were going to get poured on the schedule they set, drainage or no drainage. Told me the inspection was already handled. Delgado, the inspector of record, he was already bought. Already had his ticket to Arizona. All I had to do was let it happen. Sign where they told me. And if I didn't, he stopped. His jaw worked. If I didn't, the shop's gone, May's house is gone, Ray's kids are on the street. 60 strangers, or the 4 people I've got left in this world. That's the choice they handed me at 2 in the morning. Nora didn't say anything. She'd learned that from him. Sometimes silence is the only honest thing. I built the danger to save the people I had left, he said. And I've hated myself every hour since. I know, she said. I've been watching you not eat for a month. He laughed, a broken little sound. And then he looked at her with something like terror, because he'd finally said it out loud to another soul, and now she carried it too. What he didn't know, what she hadn't told him, hadn't told anybody, was that she carried more than the secret. She'd gone to the county office 3 weeks back, before the paper could vanish. She'd asked, plain, to see the Halstead court file. And she'd found the original inspection page, the real one, signed, dated, before somebody's cleaner copy replaced it. And she'd taken out her cheap phone, and she'd photographed it. And she'd backed it up in 3 places. Because a woman who's been poor her whole life knows you never keep the only copy of anything that matters. Meridian believed that page was gone. Delgado's file was destroyed, his memory retired to the desert on Meridian's money. It wasn't gone. It was in Nora Bell's phone, and in 2 other places, and she hadn't told a living soul. Then Cole did the cruelest kind thing he knew how to do. He came in on a gray afternoon, and he didn't sit. He stood at the counter with his hat in his hands, and he set $200 down, in 20s, counted out flat. We're square, he said. Nora looked at the money, looked at him. Cole, they're watching you because of me, he said, low and fast, not letting her in. The hours? The note. That's me, Nora. That's the price of standing near me. So I'm settling up and I'm gone. You don't know me. You never heard anything. That's how you and that girl stay whole. He tapped the 20s once. We're square. Take it. And she understood what he was doing. He was doing the same thing he'd done for his brother's kids. He was carrying the sin alone and pushing away the person he couldn't stand to see hurt. It was the only way he knew how to love anybody, from a distance, with his own body between them and the danger. She could have argued. She didn't. She reached under the counter. She pulled out the old order ticket, soft as cloth now, 3 words in her own hand. She left the $200 sitting right where he'd put it. Keep your money, she said. I'll keep the ticket. His face broke, just for a second. Then he set his jaw, and he left the 20s on the counter, and he walked out into the gray, and she let him go with her chin up and her eyes dry, because he needed to believe it had worked. She kept the ticket, not the cash. And after the door swung shut, she stood there a long moment, and then she picked up the $200 and put it in an envelope and wrote his name on it. Because it was his, and it was going back to him, and she just didn't know yet what day. The ceremony was set. 6 days out. The families were already packing. She'd see them at the grocery, boxes in the cart, kids buzzing about their new rooms. 60 families about to move on to ground Cole Cutter had told a telephone would not hold winter. Marcus Ojeda found her at the end of a shift. Marcus, the county inspector, the honest one, the one who'd been quietly sweet on her for 2 years and never once made it her problem. He sat at the counter and turned his coffee cup in a slow circle, and finally said, I ran the numbers on Halstead myself. Off the books. Off the record. He looked up. Nora, that ground fails by the second freeze. Maybe the first. Those footings will move, and when they move, the whole structure comes with them, and there'll be families sleeping inside when it happens. I know, she said. You know. He studied her. 2 years of quiet. He knew her better than she'd ever let on. How do you know? And Nora Bell made a decision she'd been circling for a month. She took out her phone, she turned it around, and she showed Marcus Ojeda a photograph of the original signed inspection page that Meridian Point Development believed had been burned to ash. Marcus went very still. Where is this? My phone, and 2 other places. She put it away. Meridian thinks it's gone. It isn't. He sat back, and something moved across his honest face. Hope and fear, and the beginning of a plan. Nora, with this, and with my read, we could stop it. But it has to be you. You have to decide to. It's not going to be me, she said. Because she'd already thought it through. A waitress with a phone photo. Meridian's lawyers would bury her, would say she doctored it, would put her on a stand and dress her in her apron, and let the room decide whether people like her got to accuse people like them. The gulf. The same gulf Pra had named across a full counter. People like you don't get owed by people like him. But a contractor. The contractor, the man whose name was on the line. If he said it, out loud, in front of cameras, and she handed up the paper that proved he wasn't lying, she went to Cole that night. Not to be saved, to save everyone. He didn't want to open the door. She could see him not wanting to. But he opened it. You've been owing me for a long time, she said, before he could send her away. $200, and then everything after. So here's the bill. She held up the phone. I kept the real page, the one they think is gone, the one with your name and Delgado's signature and the truth on it. I've had it for weeks. He stared at her like she'd walked out of deep water carrying his whole life. You could stand up at that ceremony, she said, in front of the cameras and the mayor and every family they're about to bury, and you could tell the truth. And I'll be standing right there with the proof in my hand, so they can't call you a liar. You lose the license. Maybe worse. But 60 families sleep warm. She lowered the phone. You've spent your whole life carrying the sin, alone, to protect people. I'm telling you there's a way to protect all of them at once. Pay me back, Cole. Pay me by doing the right thing. For a long time he didn't say anything. The rain had started again, soft on the roof. They'll come after you, he said finally, when they figure out where the paper came from. They already came after me. She almost smiled. I tore up their check. I'm not scared of their number anymore. And Cole Cutter, 42 years old, who had not slept a whole night in a season, looked at this woman who could have taken the money and vanished, and instead had quietly kept the one thing that could save them all. And he made his choice. Okay, he said. His voice cracked on it. Okay, the ribbon cutting for Halstead Court was a bright cold morning with the whole town turned out. Meridian had spared nothing. A white tent. Folding chairs in rows, and in the front rows the 60 families, mothers and fathers and kids in their good clothes, all of them shining with the kind of hope you only see on people who've waited a long time for a door with their own key in it. A podium. A microphone. 2 reporters and a county camera. The mayor and Ronan Halvorsen, silver-haired and loud, principal of Meridian Point Development, standing at the front like a man about to be handed a medal, treating 60 families' relief like a photo op with his name on it. Nora stood at the back, in her coat, invisible the way she'd been her whole life. Marcus stood near the camera, and when Halvorsen took the microphone and started in about opportunity and community and the promise of Ashford's future, Nora watched Cole Cutter get up out of a folding chair in the 3rd row and walk to the podium. Ronan, Cole said, I need the mic. Halvorsen laughed it off, hand over the microphone. Not now, Cole. Now Cole took it. Not roughly, just took it. and the flat certainty in his voice made the whole tent go quiet. He looked out at the 60 families. And Nora saw him decide, in real time, to set fire to his own life. "My name is Cole Cutter," he said. "Cutter and Sons poured the foundations under these buildings, and I'm standing here to tell you they will not hold." A ripple ran through the chairs. The ground under Halstead Court has a drainage defect that everyone in this business knew about. The footings were poured over it anyway, on a schedule to make a deadline, and the inspection that told you it was safe was bought and paid for. I signed where I was told to sign because Meridian Point owns my family's debt and threatened to destroy the people I love if I didn't. His voice shook and held. "If you move your children into these buildings, they will not survive their first hard winter. I would rather lose everything I have than let you find that out the hard way." For one heartbeat there was absolute silence. Then Halvorsen laughed. Loud, dismissive, working the crowd. Folks, I'm sorry. This man is a disgruntled subcontractor. He lost a bid, he's got a grievance, and he's chosen a very public place to air it. There is no defect. Every inch of this project passed county inspection. I have the paperwork right here, and that was when Nora Bell walked up the center aisle. She didn't hurry. She came up between the rows of families in her waitress's coat, and she reached the podium, and she laid a single printed sheet of paper down on it beside the microphone. The original inspection page. "Signed, dated, real, that's the paperwork," she said. One dry line. The real one, before they replaced it. And she stepped back. Marcus Ojeda came forward. "I'm a county building inspector," he said, and he held up his badge so the camera caught it. "I've reviewed this original independently. It's authentic, and it confirms every word this man just said. The soil report was overridden. The footings are non-compliant. As of this moment, I am recommending the county withhold the certificate of occupancy." Halvorsen's face went gray. It happened in real time, on camera. The color draining out of a powerful man's face as the version of events he'd counted on. The version where the paper was ash and the poor never testified, collapsed under him. And the mayor, standing at his shoulder, took one small step sideways. Then another, quietly putting distance between himself and Ronan Halvorsen in front of two reporters and a rolling camera. And Nora watched him do it. Delpra moved, fast and smooth, out of the side of the tent, reaching for the page on the podium, reaching to make it disappear the way everything inconvenient in Ashford disappeared. Nora already had her phone up. She photographed his hand closing over the paper. Click, the fixer's hand, caught in the act, in front of the whole town. Prague froze. He looked up and saw her holding the phone, saw the little red light of the camera behind her, and he understood finally that there was no number here to find, no cleaner copy, no version of this he could contain. He remembered the torn check in the bin under her register. She could see him remember it. And the smile he'd worn through every threat, the smile he'd flicked at her across a $100 bill in front of 40 regulars, the smile was finally, completely gone. He took his hand off the paper. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. What came after came fast, the way these things do once the first stone moves. The county halted occupancy that same afternoon. The 60 families who'd packed their boxes were relocated to sound units across town. Real ones, inspected ones, and the cost of every deposit and every moving truck landed. By court order. On Meridian Point. Not one child slept on those footings. The two reporters became a dozen. Meridian Point Development was indicted. Delgado, comfortable in his Arizona retirement, found out that money doesn't buy you all the way out when there's a photographed original with his signature on it. Prague, who believed to the end that everyone had a number, took a deal and gave the state Ronan Halvorsen wrapped in a bow. And Halvorsen, 71, silver-haired, certain the poor never testify, was convicted and stood in a courtroom and heard the word guilty read out by a jury of the very people he'd treated as inventory. And the fraud unwind reached down and touched Cole Cutter, who was criminally liable too, and knew it, and had known it when he took that microphone. He cooperated. He told all of it. And because the whole thing had been built on coerced debt, the liens Meridian held got voided in the unwinding. The loan on Cutter and Sons, the second mortgage on his mother's house. Ray's widow kept her rooms. His mother kept her porch. Cole lost his license for a while, but he kept his family, and he kept his name. Because in the end, his name was the thing that saved 60 families, and Ashford is a small enough town to remember that. Months later, honest light came through the windows of the Blue Kettle. It was afternoon. Slow, Junie sat in the corner booth with her books spread out, 16 and scowling at algebra. Home from a new after-school job that no developer could touch. Earl was at the counter with his eggs over hard. The place smelled like coffee and pie and floor cleaner, the way it always had. Cole came in. He looked like a man who slept now. He was running a small crew again, a legitimate one, honest footings on honest ground, and his mother's porch was freshly painted. And he'd stopped flinching at his own reflection. He sat at the counter. Nora poured his coffee. Black, no sugar. He drank it this time. Then he reached into his coat, and he set $200 on the counter. In 20s. Same as before. We're square, he said. But he was smiling when he said it now. Nora looked at the money. Then she slid it right back across the counter to him. And she reached under the register, and she took out the old order ticket, soft as cloth, frayed at the fold, 3 words in her own hand from a night that felt like another life. $200. I owe you. She said it in front of him. Keep your money, she said. But this one's yours to keep now. He picked it up. He read it, the way you read something you already know by heart. And then, slow, deliberate, he tore it in half. And then in half again. And he set the pieces down between them like a thing finally laid to rest. Because whatever was still owed between Cole Cutter and Nora Bell, it had stopped being money a long time ago. Marcus Ojeda came in near closing, tipped his hat to her, and there was no hard feeling in it, only a quiet good grace. A man who'd wanted something and lost it clean and wished her well anyway. She'd never win him a thing, and he'd never begrudge it. He got his coffee to go and left them the room. And the regulars, the same 40 who'd found somewhere else to look the day Prague flicked that 100 at her across the counter, they nodded to her now when they came in. By name. Morning, Nora. Thanks, Nora. The town that had looked away had turned back around, and it knew her name, and it said it plain. Junie looked up from her books. Nora, what's a variable? Something you don't know yet, Nora said, but you can figure out. And her sister rolled her eyes and went back to it, and Cole laughed into his coffee, and the light lay gold across the counter, and Nora Bell, 33 years old, who had spent her whole life believing that being invisible was the only way to be safe, stood in the middle of a room full of people who saw her and found that she didn't mind it at all. The torn ticket sat on the counter between them. She swept the pieces into her hand and put them in her apron pocket, right where the whole thing had started. Turns out, she said, dry as ever, wiping down the counter one more time, the quiet ones keep the receipts. If you've ever been counted as nothing by someone who thought their money made them bigger than your name, this one was for you. Tell me the town you're watching from.